David just talked about how many of us in our current life, current career, probably never imagined that when we were children what we would be doing today. And that was certainly true for me. My original plan, I was a very curious person and I like to write, so my original plan in life was to be a journalist. And part of the reason I wanted to be a journalist, and I went to journalism school and was working as a journalist, part of the reason I wanted to be a journalist is because I was a big believer in absolute truth. And absolute truth, the way I'm going to define it, is believing that there are things that are knowable. And I'm talking about in the philosophical sense, not the spiritual sense, just to get that out of the way. But there are things that are knowable that if you are willing to put in the time and energy and investigate, that you can eventually get to this truth that is immutable, that cannot be changed by someone else's perspective or someone else's observations. And that's a really good perspective to have as a journalist, because journalists get lied to and told all the time that things are different from the way that they perceive them. But unfortunately for me, as I went through my life, I decided I didn't want to be a journalist anymore for a number of reasons, and went through my life and tried many different careers out before becoming a researcher. I tended to find myself more and more seeing shades of gray on things, seeing truth as being something that was a little bit more relative to our perspectives. And in fact, part of my interest in becoming a researcher was in really learning the nuance of what people think and feel, and really learning how we have perceptions about the world that shape not only how we view the reality around us, but that also, because of that fact, shape the reality that we put others around us through. And I know that's a big topic, and I could take you down that road, but actually, I'll tell you what, let me take you down this road instead. So this road, when you look at it, you probably see a small town, which is accurate. This is a picture of a street, State Street in O'Fallon, Illinois, which is my hometown. If you were to go outside and walk over to the highway and drive 20 miles east, you would be here. It's not that far from here. But when you see this road, you probably don't see anything that's particularly interesting. And let me tell you just a little bit about O'Fallon so that you can understand how your perspective might change if you knew more about this town. O'Fallon is a town that, it's about 150 years old, and it is a town that was a small town for a long time, and then because of its proximity to Scott Air Force Base and to St. Louis, it doubled in size, and then it doubled again, and then it doubled again, and it doubled again, and now it's got about 30,000 people living in it. And this street is in the old part of town. This street is over by the train station where the people that have lived in town for a long time tend to live. And everybody else lives in the new part of town, which is much nicer. But the old part of town is next to the interstate. And the new part of town, you have to drive through the old part of town if you want to get to work. There's a lot of commuters that live in O'Fallon that have to drive through the old part of town in order to get on the highway to come to St. Louis or go to the Air Force Base. So people that live on State Street have started to see the street a little bit differently. In fact, what they call it is the drag strip. And the reason they call it the drag strip is because they are seeing all these commuters just blowing through this street. It's supposed to be a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, but they feel and they think like people are just treating it like it's a racetrack. They don't see it the way that they saw it. And another interesting fact about this street is that many years ago, the police station was just around the corner. But the police station, about a little over a decade ago, moved to the new side of town, where all the people are, where they're needed a lot more for rapid response. And because of that, a lot of the people that live in this part of town now feel like the police aren't paying any attention to this drag strip, as they call it. So I was really interested to learn that the police have been fielding a number of complaints about all of the drag racing, all the people that are just blowing down the street, either on their commute or in the middle of the night. And a lot of these complaints are coming from older residents that have lived on the street for a while. And what was interesting to me was how the police chose to deal with all these complaints. Because you see, part of the problem is there may or may not actually be a large number of people speeding down this street. This may be a matter of perception. This may be something where the people that have lived on this street lived in the town at a time when it was smaller and there were fewer cars and there were fewer commuters that were going through. And so they're just seeing more traffic. And when they're seeing more traffic, they're seeing more speeders. It might also be that they're not working, they're retired, they're home, and they're more in tune with what's going on in front of their house. So the police had a number of options in O'Fallon that they were considering on how to deal with State Street and how to deal with all these speeders. One of the options that they thought about was to have a greater police presence on the street. And the problem is that when you have a greater police presence on any street, it causes everybody to slow down. So it actually does deter people from speeding, but it also deters people who are driving the lawful speed limit or just slightly above the lawful speed limit to go slower because they see the police, and there's this thing called the observer effect that when we sense that we're being observed, our behavior changes. So that's not necessarily a good way to solve the problem, because as soon as the police are gone, people will start driving differently. And also, people that really want to speed are going to try to find alternate routes through town. And some of the alternate routes they might take might be on some of the old streets that are not built for people to be speeding down them. It might actually make things more dangerous for the police to be more present. Another thing that the police could do is to set up speed traps. So they could be less visible, but they could set up traps where they are catching people as they're speeding. And in doing so, they would probably deter quite a few people from speeding, but they would also do two things. First of all, it would have a temporary effect once again, because you can't do speed traps all the time. Secondly, it would really, really annoy people. As it happens, people in communities don't like it when you're running speed traps in their neighborhoods. It's just not something that they particularly enjoy. And so it's a short-term solution that might irritate the community and would not have a long-term effect on speeding. Something else the police could do, remember that this could be a perceptual issue. So something else they could do is they could station people in plain clothes or in cars and just keep track of the traffic and see how many people are speeding. So they could station their officers around to do this. The problem with that approach is that, first of all, it's costly. It requires person power in order to happen. And the other problem is that if those people are on or off-duty police officers and they see people that are behaving badly, they might feel inclined to go and respond to that. They might also get called away and need to respond to other things that are going on. And so their records might not be complete, or their records might be biased because of the other responsibilities they have as police officers. A couple other things they could try. One would be to install red light cameras or speeding cameras. Those are actually very controversial in the state of Illinois. Usually you have to have a city ordinance get passed to put those in place, and they're not very popular, so they don't usually pass. Another thing they could do is put in a speed bump. Now, I don't know if you guys know this about St. Louis. St. Louis is actually where speed bumps were invented. They were invented at Washington University. Yeah. They were invented at Washington University to slow people down around the campus. And we have a love-hate relationship with speed bumps in St. Louis as a result of that. Now, right here outside Mid-America Transplant, if you walk outside, you'll see a bunch of speed bumps. I'm kind of surprised that they're there because a lot of places in St. Louis have resisted having them like crazy. And that goes over to Illinois on the metro area as well. We don't like speed bumps. So again, police wouldn't necessarily be able to use those to slow people down. So I was really interested to hear how they solved this problem, because the problem that they needed to solve was they needed to understand, first of all, are people speeding? And secondly, if they are, what do we need to do in order to stop them? And what they used was this. Has anybody ever seen one of these before? Does anybody know what these are called? A game camera? So that might be another brand of this. This is called a Traxbox. And this is actually not, a game camera like you would put out on a tree. So this is actually not a camera, believe it or not. This is a box that they mount on utility poles, and it has some sensitive circuitry inside that can detect cars as they're going by. And it can detect the speeds that they're going, and it can get a little bit of information on them, but it does not take pictures. It does not mail out tickets. It is completely hidden for the most part. Unless you really knew it was there, you wouldn't think anything of it. And what's really neat about these Traxboxes is that the police can put them out. They can leave them out there for a few weeks or a month and gather a bunch of data. They can pull them down, and in about a half hour, they can read the data, and they can see what is actually going on. They can determine if there's really a traffic pattern that they need to be concerned about, if there are certain times of day that they need to look at, or if maybe the volume of complaints they were getting was due to some other factor, such as just the perception of people in the community. I think this is a really cool and elegant solution to a really difficult problem. Because when you have police in a community, ultimately, everyone wants them to do things that make the community safer. That's really the role that police are supposed to play, in the interest of public safety. But there are many actions they could take that wouldn't necessarily make things safer and might even irritate people. A solution like this, however, is one that gathers data, that really takes an opportunity to get a bunch of information before any kind of decisions or interventions are made. And the reason that I bring all that up is because that is essentially what we're going to be talking about tonight with regard to your industry. We have developed kind of a Traxbox for your industry. We have a national set of data that come from, we're going to talk tonight about data that come from 15 different OPOs, and there's actually, by the end of this year, are going to be 20 that have participated in this data set that really talk about some of the problems and the issues that you all are facing. Some of these problems are things that pertain to your industry. Some of them are things that pertain to just the medical world in general. Some of them are things that pertain to your specific organizations. And we have come and met with most of you. Most of you have gotten to see my smiling face talk about your data. Sometimes you wish I wasn't smiling with some of the things that we were sharing. But we've gotten to share that individually. Tonight we're going to talk about what we're hearing nationally. And part of the fun here is that every single one of you in this room is going to hear about things that you are living, that you are seeing, that you're experiencing. And you're going to have reactions. Some of your reactions might be skeptical. In fact, where's John Buckley? John Buckley, I remember John from Nebraska when we went to visit. He was very skeptical of what we had to share. And he really put our feet to the fire and challenged us. Now, we eventually came to a point of understanding. That's why he's here. We're happy to have him. We want you to be skeptical because we're going to be sharing data with you that in some cases probably are a little flawed, probably are a little biased, probably are a little affected by the method that we use. And part of what we're going to ask you to do as we wind down tonight is to start thinking about how we can improve this tool, how we can have a TraxBox 2.0 for your industry that can continue to get better and better data, that can help you to more capably look at these issues that are coming up and figure out how to deal with them. But with that said, we have a lot of great information and insights to share with you. And the first thing I want to do is I want to show you who all is included in the data that we're going to be talking about tonight. So as I mentioned, there were 15 OPOs from across the country, and we really did go coast to coast. Not every one of those OPOs is here. And in fact, we have a few organizations that are here that did not participate in the study this time around. But I just wanted you to get a sense of who all has participated, as well as the 5 more that we're going to be adding into the data set at the end of the year. Donor Alliance, Mora, Tennessee Donor Services, CORE, and Gift of Life, Michigan. We have a lot of really great, high-quality OPOs that have participated in this process. A lot of folks that are very, very good at what they do. And you can be confident that no matter which OPO you see up on the screen, they are dealing with some of the same problems that you are dealing with at your organization. So we'll talk about some of those themes. I also want to talk briefly about overall satisfaction. So in our study, we have a measure, it's the 3rd question on the survey, where we ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you overall with the services that the OPO provides? And we use a 10-point scale because it's a telephone survey, and 10-point scales are easy to do on the phone. They're easy for people to understand. And what we typically do is we say anyone that gives you a 9 or a 10 is in the group that we're going to call highly satisfied. If they give you a 9 or a 10, that's pretty much giving you an A. There's very little they see that you can do to improve, and when they do have suggestions for improvement, they're just things that they're thinking about. They're not things that they necessarily are expecting you to do. Anyone that gives you an 8 or below is not giving you a bad score. In fact, most of the time an 8 is actually a good score. But an 8 generally means that there's some need for improvement. So we put 8 or below in the group that we call needs improvement. And very rarely do we have anybody that gives a 5 or below. Every now and then we get them. But most of the time, your hospital partners, when they're assessing you, really see you in the, if they don't give you a 9 or a 10, they put you in the 6, 7, or 8 range. But we still call them the needs improvement group because we follow up with them and we ask them questions about what you could be doing better to serve them. And they tell us. Now, one of the questions that we get about measuring overall satisfaction is, why are you measuring this if the organizations that do really well at overall satisfaction are not necessarily the organizations that do well at key donation metrics? And this is a good question. And this came up a few years ago because there were some OPOs that were known to not be the strongest performers in their key metrics, but they were doing really, really great at overall satisfaction. And when I first got that question, it really kept me awake at night for a lot. I really thought about it a lot. It really bothered me. Why would the organizations that are good at satisfying their hospital partners, that are good at getting along with doctors, that are good at getting along with nurses and chaplains and social workers and administrators, why are they not also the groups that are the most successful at the donation activities that they engage in? I had to think about that for a while. I had to read a lot of the data. And what I ultimately realized, and we ultimately realized as we went through the data over several years, is overall satisfaction. We knew it was important, but we couldn't quite articulate why until we realized that it was a general indicator of how well a hospital partner's expectations are being met by the entire experience of working with an OPO. And those words, expectations and experience, we're going to come back to those words. So keep those in mind because those are very central to some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. Overall satisfaction is not measuring how effective you all are at the procurement process. What it is intended to measure is how well you are equipping and communicating and training your hospital partners to be a part of that procurement process. And if your process matches their expectations, they are satisfied. And if your process leaves them with something to be desired, they express a need for improvement. That's what overall satisfaction really measures. It is a valid indicator of overall sentiment, and it's useful for profiling the other data. So when we take all of the data that we've collected and we look at it and we say, this is what the highly satisfied people are saying, and this is what the people in the needs improvement group are saying, there is usually a very clear gap between those two. This is something that we call face validity in the research world, something that when we look at it, our interpretation holds up when we actually look at the data. It makes sense. It makes sense that people that are expressing lower overall satisfaction scores tend to be the more critical audience. And they tend to have very discrete things that they're talking about that you could be doing better to make them feel more satisfied overall. I also want to mention overall satisfaction is among the toughest variables to improve. So when we talk about, okay, you got all this data and here are the things you should focus on, we never say try to improve overall satisfaction because it's really, really hard to move that needle. It's really hard to move it in a manner that's statistically significant, and it's also really hard to move it just in terms of taking partners that you work with and have long-term relationships with and helping them to think better of your organization over a short period of time. It takes a long time. There are a couple of organizations here that have managed to move that needle. One of them is Donor Network of Arizona, just recently, and the other is LOPA, Louisiana Organ Procurement Agency. And we're actually going to have both of them speaking tomorrow, so there'll be two OPOs that you can hear from. They're both doing some really exciting and amazing things to work with their physician and hospital partners. But it is very, very hard to move that needle, and both of those organizations can tell you about the considerable amount of work they put in to see those kinds of gains. What I want to do now is I want to present some of the findings from our national data set, and I want to caution you with two things. First of all, this is a preliminary analysis because we still have 5 more OPOs that are going to be included in this data set, and it may change things a little bit. Secondly, we're not actually finished writing this report yet. We're going to issue it later on this month, and we'll issue it to everyone that was here. This is a report that shares the national means for each of the things that we measure, and it also provides an analysis of who is doing best and who is kind of in the middle in terms of the different things that we're measuring. We really want to focus on the folks that are doing well. We don't want to try to penalize anyone or make anyone feel bad if they're below average in something. And the reason for that is because everybody starts out below average in a lot of things when they first start this process. The folks that are doing well can be a resource to you. If someone is really good at feedback or follow-up, and those are issues that you need to target, it's good to know who's doing well so you can go and talk to them and find out what it is that they're doing. It doesn't really benefit you that much to know who's behind. So let's talk first about overall satisfaction. With physicians, the national standard for satisfaction overall has risen since 2015. This is a really interesting phenomenon because the national standard for the last 2 cycles has been about 8.5 out of 10 is the national average for physician satisfaction. As of this study, with the 15 OPOs included, it's 8.90, with 73%, or about 3 in 4, saying they're highly satisfied with the OPOs overall. And this is really cool because this means that many of you have been out really working hard to help these physician partners that you're working with feel highly satisfied about the work that you're doing. We can see it in the data. We can see it in the types of comments that they make. We can see it in the ways that they talk about you as organizations. We can see a number of comments talking about how the OPOs that these partners are working with have been getting better at doing things. Some of that has been directly through the work that you've done through this study. Some of it's just been about talking about best practices or sharing and collaborating. Whatever the case, physicians are feeling good about OPOs overall. And the organizations that really have done the best job of providing overall satisfaction to physicians this time around, Alabama Organ Center, Donor Network of Arizona, LifeBank, Life Center, and Living Legacy Foundation are the leaders. And LOPA is right on the cusp of what we call the threshold of excellence, which all these organizations are above. The threshold of excellence is that if you can get a mean score of 9.00 and have 80% or more of the folks highly satisfied, then you are doing a good job. And it's really hard to move the needle any further up. You have to focus instead on maintaining your high level of performance. So all of these organizations, if you want to know about overall satisfaction, talk to these guys or gals. With hospital staff, so hospital staff is our definition for folks that are nurses. They might be, in some cases, they might be advanced practitioners. They might be social workers or chaplains or administrators, people that work who are not physicians but work with you on cases. The national standard for satisfaction among hospital staff has declined since 2015. And this is actually interesting because for the last couple of cycles, hospital staff have had very high standards that have been met for overall satisfaction. Their mean score has been above a 9 the last couple of cycles. Now it's down to 8.83. It's more in line with the physicians, with 65% of hospital staff expressing high satisfaction. Now, we don't know if this is a true decline or if this is a blip. We'll find out in a couple of years when we repeat this study. But what we can say, these organizations have been doing a really good job with hospital staff. And by the way, not everybody includes hospital staff in their study, so there are fewer of them available to pull from here. But Alabama Organ Center, Nebraska Organ Recovery, and Sierra Donor Services are the leaders in hospital staff overall satisfaction. Although, with hospital staff, none of these organizations are above the threshold for excellence. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on with hospital staff, because we do have some ideas. We do have some insights to share. But it does seem like something is different this time around. We have a block of questions in the survey about service satisfaction. And you guys actually, as an industry, are doing really well at service satisfaction. I just want to let you know. Most of the scores are really high. And if there's one shining part of any survey that we deliver, it's the service satisfaction area, because you guys are service organizations, and you do a great job at maintaining those good service relationships that you establish with your hospital partners. Most aspects of service that we measure show very little variation overall, which means that you're doing a consistent job of providing service as an industry. There's very few OPOs that we've worked with are not doing a consistent job at service quality. However, there are three of those 6 variables have a little bit more variation. One of them is OPO displays a strong level of medical expertise, and that one shows the most variation with doctors, which, if you think about it, makes sense. They tend to be critical of anybody that's not a doctor. The other 2 are more relational. OPO tells me everything I need to know, and OPO makes me feel like part of the team. Now, neither of these variables are low. These aren't variables where we're seeing really low scores, but we are seeing variation. We are seeing less consistency in how hospital partners are rating those 2 aspects. And both of those really make sense when you have an understanding of the communication questions that we ask. We have 7 communication questions in the survey, and they're intended to assess communication at different points of the donation process. And they're also intended to pick up on keywords or key touch points that we have learned about through the research that we've done. Many aspects of communication show considerable variation. Generally speaking, half of all hospital partners see a need for improvement in every aspect of communication that we measure. So across the country, half see a need for improvement. And the 3 key words that we see coming up over and over again, preparation, follow-up, and inclusion in talking to donor families, are the most prominent pain points. We'll unpack all 3 of those a little bit more here in just a moment. But let's first talk about preparation for the donation process. 56% of physicians and 49% of hospital staff see some need for improvement in the preparation that they're being given before participating in a donation case. A common theme in the data is for partners to express a greater need to understand their role in the process or the steps that are involved. And some of you have gotten to read the data and have seen that you have partners, and remember, these partners, they're pre-qualified. They have worked with you at least a couple of times in the last 3 years. But they're saying in the study that they don't really feel like they understand necessarily the role that they're being asked to play, or they don't always know the steps of the process. They don't always know about the criteria that they're supposed to be following, or they don't always know about what you're expecting of them. And that's really kind of sad in a way, because these are folks that you should be able to rely on to know these things, but it also points to some opportunities. There's some need for better preparation. The folks who are doing the best at physician preparation are Donor Network of Arizona, LifeShare of Oklahoma, and Living Legacy Foundation and LOPA. And with hospital staff, Alabama Organ Center, Aurora, LifeBank, Nebraska Organ Recovery, and Sierra Donor Services are the strongest. What about keeping partners informed during the donation process? Well, once again, 54% of physicians and 45% of hospital staff see some need for improvement in that area. Most of the need for improved communication occurs within the very early stages of the process. Once things are in full swing, they generally don't have a lot of critique to offer, unless an OPO is really having some difficulty in explaining things to them. Once things get down the road, they tend to understand. But at the very early stages of the process, again, not always feeling prepared and not always feeling like they know the steps, sometimes there's some need for greater communication. Iowa Donor Network, the Living Legacy Foundation, and LOPA are strongest at keeping physician partners informed during cases. Alabama Organ Center, LifeBank, and Sierra Donor Service are the strongest with hospital staff. I hope some of you are smiling as you hear the name of your organization. You really should, because these are things worth celebrating. Collaboration during the donation process. 41% of physicians and 39% of hospital staff see some need for improvement in collaborative communication during the process. And those of you that have heard me speak before probably remember collaboration is a really key word to physicians in particular. That, in their minds, describes the type of relationship that they would like to have with OPOs when they're working with them on donation cases. And we learned this through research. This is something that we didn't just make up. It came through our research process. Partners suggesting improvement tend to have a lower understanding of their role in the donation process. Alabama Organ Center, Donor Network of Arizona, Life Center, Living Legacy Foundation, and LOPA are the strongest at collaborative communication with physicians. Alabama Organ Center, Life Bank, Lifeline of Ohio, Nebraska Organ Recovery, and Sierra Donor Services are the strongest with hospital staff. By the way, I will provide these slides, so if you're trying to write down all the names of all these organizations, we'll provide these all to you. Inclusion in talking to donor families is a contentious issue, and it's a contentious issue on both sides of the coin. It's a contentious issue when we talk about it to you guys and say, you know, your hospital partners really want to be more involved in the case conversations and talking with the donor families. And it's a contentious issue to them when we bring it up in the survey because they really want to be involved in talking to the donor families. 52% of physicians and 55% of hospital staff see some need for improvement in how they are included in talking to donor families. This appears to be a key pain point when hospital partners do not fully understand their role in the process or feel that they should be sidelined from case conversations. What we often feel from reading the data is that they're just not explained in a way that they accept or understand why they might need to be sidelined, or that there are times where they just feel shut out because somebody one time was maybe a little bit forceful with them and they've just carried that with them. And as we'll talk about in a little bit, sometimes that one interaction can carry over and have long-term ramifications. Iowa Donor Network and Life Center are the strongest at including physicians. Life Bank, Life Center, and Nebraska Organ Recovery are the strongest with hospital staff. Providing immediate feedback. After a case is over, we've broken communication down into two areas. One we call feedback, and that's the debriefing information that comes within hours or days of a case. It tends to be more clinical. It's not so emotional. It tends to be more about the case and the particulars of the case, but it can have a little bit about the outcome too. It is highly desired, and as those of you who have been through the process know, it is something we hear a lot about in this survey. 47% of physicians and 44% of hospital staff see some need for improvement in the feedback provided to them immediately after cases. Partners who receive feedback regularly tend to express a higher sense of feeling valued by the OPO. Those who miss it feel left out. Now, we've seen this in a number of different contexts, and I just want to let you know, whether we ask about it specifically or whether we look at the more general questions that we ask, when partners receive feedback, they feel connection to you all and to your life-saving mission. And when they don't receive it, and even if that is their fault why they're not receiving it, and we sense that sometimes it might be, they feel disconnected, they feel marginalized, they feel forgotten. They feel like they are not a part of a process about saving lives. They feel like they were part of a transaction to get some organs, and they don't want to feel that way. Iowa Donor Network, the Living Legacy Foundation, Mid-America Transplant, Midwest Transplant Network, and New Mexico Donor Services are the strongest at providing feedback to physicians. Alabama Organ Center, Life Bank, Lifeline of Ohio, and Nebraska Organ Recovery are the strongest with hospital staff. In the longer term, we also have follow-up. Follow-up is the more emotional information that comes within weeks or months after a case. This information is also highly desired. And this is an area where many OPOs, unfortunately, don't have a process that seems to be working consistently at getting this information out. And I do want to note, there are some folks that don't want follow-up information. So it is very much a matter of having your expectations met. There are some doctors that will actually tell us in the survey, I don't need any follow-up. I just want to know, was the case successful or not? That's all I need to know. But there are a lot of them that do want that emotional connection to what happened. What were the outcomes? How are the recipients doing? How are the donor families doing? They like to know all of those things. 56% of physicians and 47% of hospital staff see some need for improvement in this area. Partners who do not receive a desired level of follow-up often fall within the needs improvement group. It's an area where many OPOs show great inconsistency. And I mean, there's usually a lot of variation in follow-up. Iowa Donor Network, the Living Legacy Foundation, Mid-America Transplant, Midwest Transplant Network, and New Mexico Donor Services are the strongest at providing follow-up to physicians. Aurora, Life Bank, and Nebraska Organ Recovery are the strongest with hospital staff. One more communication area, and that's providing information on the hospital's donation program. 56% of physicians, 47% of hospital staff see a need for improvement there. Partners who do not receive a desired level of information about their donation program also tend to fall within that group that needs some preparation. I have a typo on the slide there. Iowa Donor Network, Living Legacy Foundation, and LOPA are strongest at providing donation program information to physicians. Alabama Organ Center, Lifeline of Ohio, Nebraska Organ Recovery, and Sierra Donor Services are the strongest with hospital staff. Yes?
Is this question about the outcomes of the donation program, the hospital's outcomes, basically?
It is fairly generally worded, actually in this form. How satisfied are you with the OPO's ability to provide information about your hospital's donation program to you? So it's fairly generally worded, and part of the reason for that is because we probed to try to find out why they gave that rating. And a lot of times it's really more about understanding preparatory information about the process than it is about just providing statistics. Great question, Ron. One more that we'll talk about is educational effectiveness. 72% of physicians and 51% of hospital staff see some need for improvement in the education OPOs offer within their hospitals. Partners who do not receive a desired level of education tend to be big complainers. They complain about a lot of things. Donor Network of Arizona, Iowa Donor Network, LOPA, Mid-America Transplant, and Midwest Transplant Network are slightly stronger than other OPOs providing education to physicians, though not by much. Alabama Organ Center, Life Bank, Life Center, Lifeline of Ohio, Nebraska Organ Recovery, and Sierra Donor Services are the strongest with hospital staff. Now, education, I'm just going to tell you, even when we're talking about the OPOs that are the strongest at it, it's not that much stronger than the folks that are struggling with it. It's a tough issue. It's an industry-wide issue. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means, because we have thought a lot about the question of education and how you as OPOs can do a better job of providing it, because there is a clear need for it. We hear about it every time we do the cycle. And we have a new perspective on it that I'll share with you in a little bit. Okay. What about OPOs that have shown some improvement from the previous cycle? We have a preliminary glance. Now, 7 OPOs have been through this cycle more than once. And we have 5 more that are currently in the field that are on their repetition. So we can only talk about these 7 right now. Donor Network of Arizona and LOPA have both seen a significant improvement in overall satisfaction with physicians. And by the way, I want to mention that was not only in terms of their ratings, but it was also qualitative in the open-ended comments that are in the survey. We could see a big difference in how they were being talked about. And in fact, Donor Network of Arizona, I will never forget, because I was really, really worried about their study, because we were having a really hard time getting physicians to participate. And Leslie's laughing over here because she knows. We had trouble getting them to participate because they didn't feel like they had any feedback to share, because they were so happy with so many of the things that were going on. And one of the things that Leslie will and Jennifer will share tomorrow is this really cool feedback system that they've developed so that they can get more up-to-date feedback about how they can improve cases when things are going on, and not wait until RPG comes in and does a survey 2 years later. So they have some great processes in place there that have actually made their physicians really, really happy. Sierra Donor Services has seen a significant improvement in satisfaction with handling concerns, which is always a good thing to hear that you've improved in, because nobody wants to be bad at handling concerns. All right. Looking at the data we just looked at, one thing that you should be aware of is that satisfaction is something that moves around a lot. In fact, you could kind of say satisfaction is a moving, what's the word I'm looking for? Anybody know? Satisfaction is a moving target, right? Yeah, Target. So does anybody here shop at Target? I shop at Target. I love Target. There's a Target right around the corner from my house, and we probably go there twice a week. My kids love to go there. My wife loves to go there. My kids like to look at toys. You know, that's always exciting. My wife loves to check out clearance stuff. Target is one of those retailers that's really good at putting things on clearance and just blowing it out, moving it out quickly with low prices. So we shop at Target quite a bit. Target is a really interesting company to me. One of the things I did when I got out of my journalism career is I worked in retail for a while. And so I know a lot about retail. And Target is a company that is really struggling to figure out its place right now, because Target is competing not only with other discount stores like Walmart, or like grocery stores like Aldi or Trader Joe's or things like that. It's also competing with online retailers like Amazon. And Target has actually been having a really difficult time lately trying to figure out what they want to be. They had earlier this year announced that they were going to pursue a two-entrance strategy to their store. They were going to build a second entrance for people that were shopping online to come in and pick up their online orders. And then they had a board meeting, and that went away because somebody pointed out that they also had really, really terrible customer satisfaction scores that were coming in, and that they needed to improve that before they thought about worrying about online customers. So over the last year, I've noticed a lot of changes at Target. One of the things I noticed was right away when I walked in the store. I actually took this picture this morning. And traditionally, when I walked into Target, the shopping carts would all be facing towards the back wall. They would all be in a line coming in from the door, all facing the back wall. But recently, they've flipped things around so that when you walk in the store, all you have to do is grab a cart, get behind it, and go. I think that's really interesting. Something else they've started doing is they put around these displays. These are kind of annoying, honestly, because you have to navigate around them. But they're giant shopping cart handle that have items in them. And these are impulse items that they put in the store away from other things that are near it. So like this is some Thanksgiving stuff that's up by the stationery. And at first it seems kind of annoying, like, oh man, they're really trying to push that Thanksgiving stuff. But I'll tell you, there's a philosophy behind this that I'll explain in just a moment that I think is really intriguing. They've also started putting up all these signs around the store saying priced right daily. They want you to know where they have lowered prices. They want them to be conspicuous. They want you to know that they are trying to give you the best value possible. In fact, here's another shelf with some other things that are on sale that, again, priced right daily, new, lower price. So what's Target doing? Well, Target, as a retailer, doesn't want you to just come in their store and buy the one thing you came in to buy. That is not going to make them much money if you go in and buy the one thing that you can buy. The reason Target offers all these things is because they want you to buy as much in one shopping trip as you can. They want you to take a cart. They want you to take a basket. They want you to fill it up, and they want you to walk out the door smiling. And part of how they want you to be smiling is like feeling that you got a good deal. So they're trying to be more conspicuous about helping you to identify when you are paying less. They're trying to help you to understand, here are the shopping carts. Let's go. Let's take them. One of the cool things about this new shopping cart array is that they're really thinking about the experience of the customer in a way that it's subtle, but it moves things along faster. One of the areas where people get hung up when they walk into a retail store is right at the entrance as they're trying to get a cart. So they've made it easy to get carts. And they've also made it easy to see when they're running low on carts because it'll start to get more and more open space, and they can just wheel some other carts in. They have to spend an extra minute of prep time getting those carts in that array, but it's much faster for the customer. And by the way, at Target, they don't call them customers. You know what they call them at Target? They call them guests, right? So they want the guest experience to be excellent. When they have these baskets around, these are kind of obnoxious because they're a point-of-sale item, but they're also intending, Thanksgiving is coming up, right? People are going to be buying Thanksgiving stuff, and nobody likes buying Thanksgiving stuff the week of Thanksgiving. So when they start putting out these baskets and reminding people, oh, it's time to get some Thanksgiving stuff, this actually is something that's intended to help you. It's not intended to annoy you. It's intended to say, oh, I can grab a few of these normal Thanksgiving items while I'm here, and then I don't have to get them the week of Thanksgiving. And I can get them at Target instead of my traditional grocery store, so I know I'm paying a decent price for them. When you see things like milk, where I live in Illinois, there's a price war going on with milk right now. I don't know if you guys have this where you live, but they've gotten milk down to about $1.89 between Aldi and Ruler Foods and Target and some other retailers. It's getting obscenely cheap. But they want you to know that. They want you to feel like when you're buying milk that you're not paying the premium rate for it, that you're really getting the best possible price. When you're buying meat, when you're buying bacon and things like that, anything in the store, they want you to feel like you're getting something of value. The reason they're doing that is because they're very concerned about your experience in the store. And this is something that is not unique to Target. This is something that many retailers think about and focus on quite a bit. But as you begin to understand the logic behind it, as you begin to understand why they do the things they do, you can start to see it's not as necessarily as sinister or cynical as you might think. Sometimes it actually is intended to make your life better. One of the things that we want to really help you to think about as we're talking about some of the insights that we're going to share is that these are things that we have come up with by looking at the data. We have read a lot of data, okay? We have read a number of pages of comments from physicians and nurses for a bunch of different OPOs across the country, and not just in this cycle, but in previous cycles as well. We think a lot about you guys. We think a lot about what you're going through with your hospital partners. And we want to help you to take that information and to make not only your lives better in serving them, but their lives better as well, so that as you have a good relationship with them, that you can reduce the friction, you can reduce the wear and tear on you guys and on the relationships with them, and really be fruitful and work towards having the best possible outcome. So we're going to share a few insights with you that come from the data. And these insights, I'm going to start with 3 that are what we're going to call refined insights. And that's because last time when we were in Pittsburgh 2 years ago having a best practices summit, I shared 5 insights. And I realized that they need to be revised a little bit. So we're going to revise 3 of them. And by the way, these are also in the book that we handed out. So you can read in the book if you want some more detail. But refined insight number 1 is that a lack of preparation before entering into a donation case, and then feedback and follow-up at the end of a donation case, those feelings are related to one another. We observed in 2015 that many partners are coming into the donation process underprepared, both emotionally and in terms of the role that they play. And we saw many leaving feeling as if they missed the end of the story. So you had it on both sides. You had people that were coming in and going, I don't really know what I'm doing. And then they were leaving and going, well, I didn't really hear what happened, so I guess it was successful. I don't know. And we were hearing that pretty consistently across the country. We've realized that these are coming from the same basic root cause. The root cause is a lack of connection for some partners to the bigger picture of donation. And when I say it's a lack of connection, I mean that they understand the process that you're going through, but they're not necessarily connecting to the bigger picture of your mission. They're not necessarily connecting to the bigger picture of saving lives and all the good things that come out of it. And a lot of that is because when you're interacting with them, you just haven't had the time to necessarily prepare them to see all of those connections in a way that makes them really feel it. And we know that they can feel it because some of your hospital partners express those values, express those thoughts, express knowing that when they participate in donation that they're saving lives and that it really matters. So it's up to you to help partners to make these connections consistently. Okay, refined insight number 2. Partners are often aligned and engaged, but their expectations don't always match reality. Okay, so can I tell you guys something? I actually said something in 2015 that I now want to say I was wrong, okay? What I said was that we saw a lot of potential to look at alignment and engagement, which are 2 things that you can measure, in terms of your hospital partners. And we were gonna get to the heart of where their disconnection with satisfaction was. And the reason that we went through this is because we, at the time, were thinking about your hospital partners are kind of like extended employees in a way. And when you do employee studies, one of the gold standards is to look not at satisfaction, but at engagement, which is how driven people feel to participate in your mission, and alignment, which is how connected they feel to your mission. And we thought, we're going to get a lot of insight out of measuring alignment and engagement. We're going to see where this drives satisfaction, and we're really going to get it. And we didn't. What we found instead was something very different. And this is where, as a researcher, I love being surprised. So we were surprised. We were surprised to find that most of your hospital partners, regardless of how they feel about satisfaction, feel aligned and engaged. They feel connected to your mission, that's aligned, and they feel driven to participate in it, that's engaged. Even if they are expressing the most harsh of criticisms, they feel connected generally to your mission. That's really interesting. So where they grow frustrated is in feeling undervalued or forgotten, often due to their own, perhaps unrealistic expectations. It's up to OPOs to help them set those expectations appropriately. Now, this is actually a good thing, and we're going to talk in a few moments about how when you are thinking about how you relate to your hospital partners, that you guys have an ace up your sleeve in terms of just the mission of what you're doing. And I think that's part of the reason why this alignment and engagement is so strong. By the way, it didn't used to be this way. David can tell you, before I started, I've been with RPG for 7 years. Before I started, I looked at some of the studies from before we started doing this in earnest. And many of the hospital partners we interviewed back in the old days did not like OPOs. They did not like you at all. They called you wolves and vultures and vampires and all kinds of other horrible things. And I'm sure some of you have been around to have experienced that personally. There has been a sea change over the last decade or so where hospital partners feel better about transplant and they feel a lot better about donation. They feel like the context of what you're doing is good and they want to be a part of it. So that has changed. Okay. Refined insight number 3. OPOs are expected to be proactive communicators. Now, this is actually an insight we got right in 2015, but that we are going to explain in a little bit more detail with the new data that we have. We observed in 2015 that many partners expect the OPOs they work with to take the initiative to communicate. That is still true. Now we know that this communication doesn't have a one-size-fits-all approach. And a communication strategy, and particularly a management platform like a CRM platform, is an emerging necessity. Now here's the thing. We inserted a bunch of questions into the survey this time to learn about modes of communication. We wanted to understand, are there approaches that you can use to share information at different stages of the donation process that are effective for most people, so that you can really hone in on doing what's most effective for the most people, and then you can go and kind of cater to those who need more personalized contact later on. And what we found is that from OPO to OPO, there was no consistency. At some OPOs, the doctors wanted to be talked to in person at almost every stage. At other OPOs, they mainly wanted email and maybe being texted or paged. At other OPOs, the hospital staff really preferred to be called on the phone. At other OPOs, they said, no, don't call us on the phone. You have to talk to us in person. That's what we want. So there is no silver bullet for communication. There is no way where I can say, industry-wide, you guys can focus on emailing, and 80% of the time you're going to get to the right people at this stage of the process. It just isn't working that way. But what I can tell you is that consistently across the industry, we would hear that OPOs are very good at sharing information when it's requested, and they're generally pretty good at having representatives stop by and say hi, but they are not good at being proactive communicators. And what I mean by proactive communicators is in sharing information before it's requested. So there is a lot of opportunity for you to be more proactive. And it is desired. It is not something that we just made up that we thought, oh, this might be important to them. It is something that they want you to be. They would like to see you be more proactive. When you are not keeping good track of communication with your hospital partners, it's very easy for inconsistency to creep in and some partners to feel marginalized or forgotten. This is a struggle that we've seen a lot of organizations deal with. And part of the problem is that communication tends to be tied too much sometimes to specific coordinators or specific hospital services personnel. And it is not being documented, it's not being shared, and as a result, if that person leaves or they take on another role or they're just having a bad day, all of that is lost. And it's hard to pick up from that and figure out who is going to be able to reestablish communication. So we've seen that in the data, we've heard that from you when we've been presenting. There's definitely a lot more opportunity to be proactive communicators. Now, a few emerging insights. Emerging insights are things that we got out of this phase of the data. Okay, by the way, these are also in the book, just in case your hand's starting to cramp up. OPOs need to define what an excellent experience looks like and then make it happen every time. Now, we're going to talk about this tomorrow. This is actually, we got, right before lunch tomorrow, we got a whole session where we're going to talk about this topic. Reducing variation in a partner's experience requires setting clear internal and external expectations and then striving to live up to them. It's important to know what success looks like. It's also important to know what failure looks like. So if you haven't already been through an exercise like this, it is worth thinking about. How can we sit and really think about, with every touch point that we have, with every service interaction that we have, what are our expectations? What are our partners' expectations? What's it look like to succeed? What's it look like to fail? And what's it look like to go way above and beyond? Because that's ultimately what we'd love to do if we can. We're going to discuss this framework tomorrow for addressing this issue. Emerging insight number 2. It's time to rethink the role advanced practitioners are playing in the donation process. Now, how many of you guys have observed nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, or other advanced practitioners taking on more of a role during donation cases? That's what I thought. We've been hearing a lot about it this year, and we're going to continue to hear about it. This is one of the biggest trends in healthcare right now, and it is starting to go like a train. Advanced practitioners are taking over a lot of roles that doctors are either unable to continue to fill or that doctors don't want to fill. Primary care, I was reading today, in the next 10 years, anywhere between a third to half of all primary care encounters are going to be with advanced practitioners only, no doctor involved at all. There are a lot of trends going on that are really going to change the role of advanced practitioners. And traditionally, we have never included this group in our survey as a breakout. We've always just lumped them in with the hospital staff. Every now and then we'll treat them as a doctor, which means they get the doctor incentive, which is always nice. You know, they get a little bit of extra money to participate in the survey. But here's the thing. Advanced practitioners are a really interesting group because they're kind of a hybrid of physicians and hospital staff, with the advantage that they usually have come up through the same channels that many of you came up through, if you have a medical background. They might have started out in the same pool as students that went on to become doctors, but they went on into the advanced practitioner route instead. And as a result, they're a little more sympathetic sometimes to your concerns, and they don't have that same, what was that term that you used earlier, David, about doctors? That The God complex, there we go. Advanced practitioners don't always have that same kind of God complex that doctors are kind of infamously known for having. They are an amazing area of opportunity for building new relationships that can be really, really beneficial to your organization, and they need some focus. One of the things that we're going to recommend is that we need to start interviewing them as a breakout in this study, separate from hospital staff, which includes the nurses and chaplains and social workers and whatnot, and the physicians themselves. The time to begin building inroads with advanced practitioners is now, and it will likely provide great benefits in the years to come. Okay, emerging insight number 3. Education is more than a nagging concern or thankless chore. It's a major opportunity to change the dynamic. Now, how many people, when I said the word education, groaned or felt like they wanted to groan? Because every time we come and present to you guys, we hear it, okay? You saw the statistics. Most doctors and most nurses think that your industry could be better at educating them. And the education that is being provided, and I'm not talking about necessarily, really high-minded education. I'm just talking about the day-to-day stuff that's helping to prepare them for cases. When we look at the things that they actually want to learn, and we have a number of questions about this in the survey, but when we look at the things they want to learn, they are so basic that it almost breaks your heart because you're like, wow, they don't know basic steps of the donation process, and they're doctors that have been working with us. They don't understand brain death criteria, even though we've done seminars on that to educate them. They don't understand the difference between brain death and DCD very clearly. All these things come up, and there are many other topics as well. They want to know about donor family management and donor management. They want to understand the steps of the process that are going on and what role they play in filling those steps. They want to know that you're educating other people that are going to be working with them on cases. They want to see more education. Now, here's the cool thing. Let's stop thinking about education as a burden for a moment. Let's think about it as an opportunity. Education fosters trust and credibility. When you educate someone, when you teach them something, when you're a knowledge expert, it gives you an opportunity to go to them and say, here, I am going to give you something of value, and it's going to be something that you can use that's going to help you. And it creates a new dynamic between you and them. It allows you to give your partners something of lasting value that cannot be easily replicated by other interactions. You can give them pins, you can give them badge buddies, you can give them all that stuff. But if you can give them real education, even if it's just a couple of minutes, even if it's just some on-demand stuff that you put together that can help to equip them for the process, it's going to benefit them in the long run, and it's going to connect them to you more closely. Education needs to be, by your industry, repackaged into on-demand chunks and reconnected to touch points to each OPO's broader mission. This is a topic we will talk much more about tomorrow because it's a big topic and there's a lot to unpack. But we think the fundamental shift needs to be in looking at education as an opportunity to reconnect to your hospital partners and not as a burden that you're just not funded to do. Because the problem is that you're going to have to be creative. You're going to have to think about how to get around the funding issue or the time issue and make most of what you've got. Now, another emerging insight that I want to cover before we get to a really positive one. When partners perceive things go wrong with donor families, what starts as a disagreement becomes a flashpoint. Now, I picked that word flashpoint as a particular word because we see this in the study, and we've heard lots of stories about it too from you all. When things go wrong with a donor family, that is when interactions can really get heated. That's when emotions can get high. That's when shouting matches can occur. That's when things can happen that have long-lasting impact on your relationship with your hospital partners. And by the way, don't just assume that the person that was involved in the interaction was the only person that saw it, because we have plenty of data to tell you that the nurses and the chaplains and the social workers and the administrators are all watching too. Many hospital partners feel that the OPO they work with shows respect to donors and donor family. That's true. We see most of them do feel that way. But when they see things go wrong, it sticks with them, and it can rapidly erode the foundation of trust and credibility the OPO has built. So it's worth thinking about how to keep those instances from cropping up. And a lot of times, it requires a very carefully managed approach. Sometimes it means that you might have to rethink who's going to be in the role of having those interactions. Or it might require, as David mentioned, more preparatory soft skills training and things like that to try to diffuse these situations before they become a flashpoint. There's also a growing desire for partners, particularly physicians, to be involved in case conversations with the donor families. When they're shut out, even with good intentions, they are likely to feel marginalized. Now, this is a big topic too. This is one I don't have an answer for you for, but I will tell you that Every time we do this survey, we hear about this theme more and more. I want to be a part of the case conversation. I want to be in the room with the donor family. I don't want to feel like they're pushing me away and taking over. Some OPOs have managed to train their hospital partners to let them take over. And one that I think was at Living Legacy, wasn't it, that we kind of found that in you guys hospital partners, that you guys were good at letting them kind of walk away, wasn't it, Laurel? Sorry to pick on you.
Yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
sure what you're.
Okay, so I'll yeah, well, you guys had, if I remember right, in your survey, we saw that they were not having the same expectation, because you guys have done a very good job of training them to say, okay, we're going to take over now, and we are experts at this, and we can handle this. And is that not accurate?
Because it depends on the physician, and sometimes we actually would prefer that they stay in the room with us. We lead the conversation, but they're there with us as support. And some of them break off and want that separation, and others are all for it.
Okay, so it's more nuanced than I was saying. Okay, so sorry to pick on you, Laura. It just kind of occurred to me as I saw you sitting there. But we have seen some OPOs are really good at saying, you know what, we can handle this, and we're good at it, and you guys have to trust us. And the hospital partners are okay with that, because the OPO has built enough trust and credibility with them that they believe that. But a number of times, they want to be in the room, and there are a lot of times where they're being told they can't be. And as an industry, you need to think about how to address that, and what new techniques you can try to find to bring them into the process, because they want to be there. They feel connected to that. And the reason for this comes from this fifth insight. The noble mission of donation is an increasingly attractive force in today's hospital environment. Now, this is something that David picked up on a few years ago that we just see more and more in the data that we're collecting. Hospital partners work in a world that is rife with tragedy. Hospitals are less and less likely to serve as a general purpose, and instead are focused on more serious cases. They're focused on trauma, they're focused on people in the ICU, they're focused on the very ill, and that is more and more who your hospital partners are seeing in their everyday lives. Tragedies everywhere, and donation is a shining ray of hope and renewal amidst the despair of suffering and death. Do not take that for granted, because that is something that they articulate to us often in the data that we collect. They see what you're doing. They see your life-saving mission as something that is different from their day-to-day lives, and it is something that they grab onto and they want to be a part of. And when I talk about them being aligned and engaged, this is what they're connecting to, this unique mission that you guys have that nobody else in the medical world has, that you guys are able to take a tragic circumstance where someone is going to die and you are able to save lives through a miracle of transplantation. That matters to them, and being a part of the donation process to make that happen is a big deal to them. Whether they tell you that or not, it is a big deal. But this may explain the cognitive dissonance that occurs when a hospital partner has a poor experience with an OPO. Does everybody know what cognitive dissonance is? Cognitive dissonance is a psychological term. It talks about when you go through an experience, you have some expectations of how it should go, and it doesn't quite match up, and you feel conflicted about it once you've been through it. That's basically a summary of how that works. Michael back there, Michael's a PhD in experimental psychology. He could probably refine my definition here, but cognitive dissonance is something that we want to avoid. And the good thing is that the nobility of the cause is really important to them, but when it's marred by feelings that the experience did not quite measure up, then it causes them to feel conflicted about what they went through. And so, again, we see this in the data. This is not something that I'm making up or that I'm inventing. It's something that we see over and over in the many different interviews that we've conducted, that there are doctors and nurses out there that have worked with you all, that love what you do, but that had an experience that really has made them think a little differently about donation, because it just didn't quite live up to the expectation they had for the shining ray of hope that they thought it was going to be. And you have to rebuild that trust. You have to reconnect them to the mission. You have to make them feel like they're connected to what's going on. Okay. I've given you a lot to think about. So let me tell you something about something that I did this year. I came up with a really stupid idea. Every year I give myself these absurd challenges, and this year I decided I was going to read 365 books in the entire year, so a book a day basically. And I don't know why I thought I was going to do this. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I made it through 150. And year's not over. I'll probably make it through a few more. By the way, my wife took on this challenge with me, and she is several books ahead of her goal right now, so she's going to make it. My wife loves to read. But for me, the problem was that when I read, and I wasn't necessarily reading good books, by the way. I read a lot of graphic novels and junky books, but I also read things like The Great Gatsby and some books like that too. So I tried to mix it up. But what I find is that when I read, when I consume a lot of information, that my head starts to get full, and I start to think a lot, and I can't keep reading because I just run out of room to think about things that I need to process, and I need to get it out, and I need to go through my reaction to what I read before I can consume more. So for me, reading 365 books in a year just doesn't work because my head just gets overfull with ideas. It actually kind of happens to me that way too when I'm reading 15 OPO reports in the last 2 years and trying to make sense of them and write reports for you. I think a lot, and I get a lot of ideas, and and then we come in and we interact with you, and we get more ideas, and we talk about it. And so one of the things that we have started to try to do is to synthesize all these big ideas that we're talking about. And David can tell you, I go into his office almost every day with a big idea about something. And most of the time he just nods and goes, yeah, that's interesting, Sean. I don't know if he always follows what I'm saying. But one of the things that we've started to construct is how can we really understand what's going on with service assessment. So when we're talking about your hospital partners assessing you on all these different things you do, service and communication and education and all these other things, what's going on? Well, at the root of all of this is that you're providing a service to them. It's a service that is initiated by the context of what's going on. So it's not user-initiated or provider-initiated. It's a partnership, but it's also contextual. It's because of the opportunity for donation. But you're coming in and providing a service. You're going to be the organization that's going to come in and be the procurement operation for donation. And you're going to help them to participate in the process because it's not something that they're experts in. It's something that you're going to be able to help them to do effectively and that you're going to ultimately be able to take on to the transplant phase. So then they're going to go through this evaluation of trust. An evaluation of trust starts with understanding your experience and your credibility and your reputation, and maybe even the need that they might have to work with you. Then they're going to go through a setting of expectations, and this is all happening in their mind. They're thinking about, okay, what do I expect is going to happen in this service interaction? They might rely on their direct experience. They might rely on experience with similar organizations that they've worked with. They might have education. They might have expectations that are educated. In other words, they're things they've learned about from you or from other people that have told them about the process. And they might have some practical expectations. They might understand that there are times where things are going to go wrong, or there are times where things aren't going to quite work out, and they're willing to expect that. Then they're going to go through the service experience, and there are 3 general outcomes that they're going to think about: a complete success, a partial success, or a failure. And failure is not necessarily a bad thing, and a partial success is not necessarily a bad thing, but these are things that can happen that can change the next step, which is they're going to evaluate their perceptions of what happened. And they're ultimately going to think about you in 3 ways. They're going to say, they exceeded my expectations, and that's where they have what we call delight. Delight is where you go above and beyond. Most of the time, they're going to say, yeah, they met my expectations. They did what I thought they were going to do. And sometimes, they're going to say, yeah, they were below my expectations. I'm disappointed. I wish things could have been better. So as we're thinking about this is kind of a big picture of the thought process that's going on. And one of the questions that we need to ask is, what can we do to ensure that things are going well enough that we're generally getting expectations met or exceeded, that we're not getting too much in the area of disappointment? Are there discrete steps that we can look at where we can ensure that we have as much control over this process as possible? Well, we're going to talk more about that tomorrow. But in the meantime, I want to close by just reminding you all that perceptions really do define reality in our relationships and in our experiences with others. We are social animals. I tell my kids this all the time. They don't believe me that we're animals. They think of animals as being things at the zoo. But we are social animals who look to each other to determine the course of our own actions. So we, more often than we like to admit, take cues from other people around us, and those cues change and govern our behavior. There's a lot of research that has gone to show that. How we feel and what we expect about an interaction shape our perceptions of it. So experience shapes expectations, and meeting expectations shapes satisfaction. What we expect of others is largely dictated by similar interactions we've had in the past, or what we've experienced vicariously through word of mouth. When we're confronted with a new context is when there's something new happening that we're not familiar with all the ramifications of it, we're often unsure of what to expect, and we may reach incorrect conclusions if we're not properly educated about what to expect. We want to experience delight when our expectations are exceeded. We do not want to experience disappointment when our expectations are not met, and we often reflexively cast blame when we're let down. So, for example, last night I took my son to Burger King. We have a Burger King around the corner from our house. And we weren't expecting great service, but our food took more than 10 minutes to get to us. It was just like 3 items. We didn't want to be disappointed. We didn't go to Burger King and say, we want to have to wait a long time for cheap, not that great for you food. But the reality was we were still disappointed because we expected, this should take a few minutes, and we waited a lot longer than we intended to. And it wasn't like they were busy or anything. We wanted to experience delight. We wanted them to have it ready as soon as we ordered it, right? We wanted to feel like, wow, they're really on the ball tonight. But we didn't have that experience. Well, that happens in any service interaction. We want to be delighted. We're okay with being satisfied. We don't want to be disappointed. Trust builds relationships, and relationships build tolerance. We want to give others the benefit of the doubt and weigh their reputation and credibility as well as our own experience to assign trust to any interactions that we have. Trust is the currency of relationships. The greater the trust, the stronger the relationship. The stronger the relationship, the more tolerance we have for the other party to fail to meet our expectations. So we should look at every opportunity we have to build trust. How do you destroy trust? By not following through on the things that you say you're going to do, by showing people that you're not the person that they thought you were when you're in an interaction that gets heated, by doing things that make them feel like you don't share their values. There are lots of ways that you can erode trust. Fortunately, you guys are very good at building trust because you guys are very high-minded, ethical, awesome organizations. This is not an area where you struggle. In fact, your hospital partners trust you a lot. They think a lot of you. They think very well of your ability to be great organizations that have their best intentions and the best intentions of donors and donor families at heart. So with all that said, let's talk about what's next. Every time we go through this process, we like to tell you what we're thinking about how we're going to improve the data that we're collecting. And by the way, we're going to have a few minutes for reactions and questions and answers and things like that. And if you see anything up here that you really like or that you really want to challenge in what we're thinking about, by all means, please share it with us because none of this is set in stone yet. But we've talked a lot about in building this process. We've worked with about 30 OPOs on the Hospital Partner Study. We worked with 20 during this cycle, but we've worked with about 30 overall. We'd like to work with more. We had a users group that we set up a couple of years ago. Some of you were members of the users group. And because of a failing on my part, I didn't keep the user group going. And the user group was intended to help us to continue to refine the way we're asking questions and to think more carefully about the data that we're collecting. We want to rebuild a users group. And we want to ask each OPO that's here and each OPO that participates to volunteer a delegate to be a part of our users group. The users group meets online. You don't have to go anywhere or do anything special. But we really appreciate the feedback that we can get from you all. And we feel like anytime we're designing a survey that's intended to help you, that you need to have a role in the creation and refinement of that tool. And so we really want to bring the users group back. This group will provide feedback on the new survey instrument and participate in an online community once a quarter or so to share additional perspectives. And it's not a big ask. We try to make it as easy as possible. But we really would like for you all to think about nominating someone to be a part of our users group going forward. Secondly, we need to think of a way to do this survey better because how many of you guys heard that from a hospital partner that they wish they could have done this survey online? Anybody? I know we've got this feedback a lot this year in particular. We are actually pilot testing this right now at Tennessee Donor Services. We had we went out and tried to get as many folks on the phone as we could. And then with the people that we couldn't get to participate, we are now doing an online survey with them. And they have an option to either take the open-ended part of the survey online as a separate survey or to be called and ask the questions. And I think only one person of 8 has wanted to be called so far. So online is clearly a way that's working for some of them. We would like to make online work. The problem with online surveys, and those of you that have asked us about it have heard, you just don't get the same depth of information as having a human being on the phone asking questions. And our interviewers, you'll get to meet one of them tomorrow, our interviewers are really, really good at their jobs. They are really good at getting deep, valuable, useful information. So we don't want to sacrifice that. We're thinking a lot about how we can have maybe a brief online component of this survey and then follow up with a phone call later on. We're thinking about maybe we can issue some things that we call pulse surveys when we're not in the field that can help you to get some general sentiment about how things are going with a few focused questions. And then we can do the deeper survey on the phone later on with just the folks that really need to be focused on. We're looking at online alternatives is what I want to say. And we welcome your feedback. And we're going to ask the user group to help us to pilot this system as well. 3, explore building a national panel for hospital partners. So in the research industry, we do a lot of research outside the OPO world too, believe it or not. We work with hospitals and healthcare systems. We work with consumer organizations, things like that. Most of the time, if you wanted to do a survey 10 or 15 years ago, you could just call people up on the phone or send a letter to their house and they'd participate in the survey, no problem. And these days, doing a survey in that way is getting harder and harder. So the research industry has gone to what are called research panels, which is where they recruit people and they say, hey, we're going to have research for you to participate in later on, and we want to get you roped into this panel right now so that we'll have you on demand when we're ready for you. And those panels are a really neat idea, but the problem is with panels, you have to keep them busy or people don't participate in them. We would like to figure out a way, though, that we can build a physician panel and maybe eventually a hospital staff and advanced practitioner panel so that we can get better feedback for you all from your hospital partners in a way that's convenient for them, that maximizes the online methodology, and best of all, does not require you to have to complete these giant lists at the beginning of every process that then you have to help us manage as we're trying to go through the process. The problem is, this is something that we have the skill to do it, but building a physician panel is a very difficult thing. It's very time intensive, and we're going to need a lot of input from you all before we can do it. So it's something that we're thinking about, we'd really like to do, and we welcome your input on it. 4 is to develop measures of relationship and experience. So again, we got something wrong. We said alignment and engagement were going to be the big things. In learning about that, we really realized that relationship and experience were the deeper issues. So we need to measure those. We need to find out ways to learn more about them. And we're going to suggest this time around that maybe we pilot these questions with a few physicians before we roll them out to everybody in the national survey. So we'll be working on that. We have started in this year, anyone that did the survey this year probably got a chance to do this. We've started, instead of just saying, hey, get a list together and we're going to interview as many physicians and nurses as we can, we started looking at your SRTR activity data and saying, where are you doing the most donations? Those are the hospitals that we need to make sure have the best representation in the survey. This has been a really cool tool. This is actually suggested by Dean Capel, who's the former CEO here at Mid-America Transplant. It's been a really cool tool. And it has helped a lot of the OPOs that have participated this year to ensure that they have good participation. Because there's nothing worse than getting your survey results back and finding out that one of your major hospitals didn't have anybody participate in it. So we're trying to really get a handle on that and make sure that we get the right people participating in the survey. And it is impacting the quality in a wonderful way. 6 is consider making advanced practitioners a third group of focus within the study. And I already mentioned this. This is something where we, again, would really like to hear feedback from you all and from the user group into how we can include this group and ensure that they are giving us good, valuable information that justifies breaking them out. With all that said, I know we've thrown a lot at you. There's been a lot of content that has gone out. And some of it are probably things that you are still going to need to chew on and think about. Some of it might be things that you disagree with, that you're skeptical of. And all of that is great, because part of our job here tonight is to challenge you so that tomorrow when we all get together that you have some new perspectives to be thinking about. Whether you agree or disagree with the things we're saying, whether you found a lot of resonance in it, or whether I've told you a lot of things that you already knew, we want you to be thinking about these issues. Because tomorrow morning, we're going to have 4 OPOs starting at 8 a.m. presenting what they've been doing. And they're going to share their practices, and they're going to field your questions. We're going to have one of our interviewers come in and talk to you in detail about what it's like to interview physicians. And you're going to learn a lot from it, because interviewing physicians is a really interesting subject. I'm going to talk with you more about this framework that we have for looking at some of the opportunities that you have for building stronger relationships and stronger experiences. And then after lunch, we're going to have a physician panel come in, and they're going to tell you about their thoughts. And these are physicians, by the way. We asked Mid-America to find some physicians that we've never heard from before. So these are physicians that have fresh perspectives to share with you. After all that, we're going to break you all into groups, and we're going to give you a couple hours to process all this stuff and to think about it and to talk about with each other what you can take back to your organizations. So it's going to be action-packed tomorrow. We're really looking forward to it. But with that said, I wanted to take a moment and just see if you have any questions, if you have any reactions, if you have anything that you want to just share with the group. What are your thoughts? Yes, and please, if you could just say your name and wave to everyone in the room so they all know who's talking.
Hi, I'm Angie Hoffman. I'm from Fort, Pittsburgh. My biggest question is, how are other OPOs determining which physicians that you are surveying, and how is that an equal representation between OPOs? Maybe they're going for all the ones that they know love donation.
This is a wonderful question. And this is a question that we would like to continue to build consistency in between OPOs. But the reality is that every one of your organizations is different. And the way you relate to your donation programs at every organization is different. So our general rule is that we ask that you provide us with a list of as many physicians and nurses and whoever else that you're surveying as you can, and that they've worked on at least 3 cases within the last 2 years. And that if you want to focus on A hospitals, that you include all of them from the A hospitals. If you want to include B, C, and D hospitals or any other special case hospitals, that we include them and try to get a proportional sample. But everybody does it a little bit differently. So a group like CORE, you guys have a big service area and you have a lot of great hospitals. And so you typically have a really large sample to draw from. Whereas there are other OPOs that are small and they struggle to get 20 physicians to participate, whereas you guys can easily get 60. So we have to kind of adapt things and change things around a little bit, but we try to keep it as consistent as possible so that when we have comparative data that it's something that's actually apples to apples and not apples to oranges. And one good example I would give is that we only look at A hospital physicians and A hospital staff when we're making comparisons, because that's the common denominator that everybody includes in their survey. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
I didn't know it was
Yeah.
just 8 hospitals that they.
For the comparative data. But individual OPOs may include other hospitals as well. And we've even started breaking out pediatric hospitals at some OPOs, because the pediatric hospitals, we want to make sure that they don't have a different perspective from A hospitals, B hospitals, and so on. Great question. Yes, sir.
I required my HD staff for any physician that we knew we had a conflict with or that submitted a complaint, they had to be on the list too. So I don't know how many of them actually responded, but we made them at least include that person with the hope that they'd be giving us some juicy feedback to use. Yeah, we got some of them.
And I love that comment. Thank you, John. So John, again, is from Nebraska. And that comment is, you know, just to make sure that we didn't seed our sample with the people that have the nicest possible things to say about us, we made an effort to include the people that have complained. And I think that's a really great practice. That's actually something that we might want to consider adding into our definition of who to include. Ultimately, we are at the mercy. At RPG, we're at the mercy of the folks that you provide to us to participate in the study, because we don't work with them. We don't have any relationship with them. When we're contacting them on your behalf. And so we have to rely on you all to tell us who we need to survey. With that said, we have this meeting, every time we meet with any of the management, we always talk about the fact that we don't want to just talk to the people that have good things to say about you, because that's not a real good use of this survey. This survey is very resource intensive. And to only talk to people that are going to say great things about you is really a waste of your time and your resources to get that kind of feedback. We want to really talk to people that have something good to say. Yes?
So did I hear you say that the surveys picked physicians who were involved in 3 cases in the last 2 years?
That's our general criterion, yes.
So then are the questions intended to focus on those 3 cases in the last 2 years? Or can they just share an overall?
It's just that we want to talk to physicians who had experience with it. But it's just a minimum of 3 cases in the last 2 years. We don't focus on those cases.
And
Some people have had 20, 30 cases. I mean, we don't want to talk to somebody that's had 1 case and it was 4 years ago.
And there's some additional nuance to that as well. One of the things that we've learned in doing this is that physicians often have participated in a lot more cases than they are recorded participating in, especially if they're in a busy hospital. So a lot of times their perceptions are based on many more cases than might be on the physician of record for. We try to make a point of understanding, are they talking about something recent, or are they talking about something that happened a long time ago, especially if this is something really negative. And in a repeat survey, we try to restrict them to talking about what's happened in the last year. We can't always get them to talk about that, but we try to qualify that as much as we can. That's an excellent question.
That's what I was
Yeah.
driving at, that they don't harbor old issues and dredge them up, even if the last 2 years, things went really well.
And they absolutely do. And and we all know that they do. And one of the things that we really try when we're at the draft phase of the report is we ask the client who's working with us to tell us, is there anything in here that we misread? Like, did somebody say something that isn't really thematic or isn't really something that's going on in your organization? I'll give you a great example. A few years ago, we had an OPO where they got some feedback, and this person was complaining about how they were walking into the OR in black scrubs, and how could they dare walk in the OR in black scrubs when they're in the business of getting people's organs? And we thought it was a really weird comment, but it was really interesting. So we were going to ask the OPO about it. And so David just kind of innocently asked them, so what did you think about that comment about walking in black scrubs, and they said, oh, we don't know what they're talking about. We don't wear black scrubs when we go into the OR. So we get comments like that sometimes that they're really interesting, but they're not representative. And so we always try to get feedback before we finish our report to make sure that we're not saying anything that's really out of line with the experience that the OPO is having. That's a wonderful question. Yes?
With engaging the physicians and so forth on these questions, does it distinguish between brain death cases and DCD cases?
We need to do a better job of that. I think it's a great point. And so this has been one of the things that when we started this process, most of the physicians that were working on brain death cases. DCD was relatively rare. In fact, we used to have questions about DCD, and they really didn't have much feedback to say about it. As it turned out, when we asked about DCD, they felt DCD were the better managed cases than brain death, believe it or not, because DCD was always really rigorously controlled, and brain death was all over the place. Well, things have changed, and I think it's time for us to get back to qualifying the difference between brain death and DCD in cases because of the changes in the environment. So that's an excellent point, and something that we really need your feedback on how we can begin to break these data out and make them more and more useful, and that's an excellent way that we could begin to do that.
I like the thought of the ARNPs and the PAs being included, because those of us in bigger academic centers and all, that's exactly who you're working with a whole lot more than your staff positions.
So that's, and this is Suzanne from Iowa Donor Network. That's something that we're hearing. It really varies across the country, and I want to ask you all, since we're on the topic, where are you dealing with advanced practitioners? Are they more at the academic centers? Are they more at the outlying centers? Are some of you not seeing them at all? Just curious. Yes.
From Mid-South Transplant Foundation in Memphis, and what I'm seeing is actually rather awesome. We're having TIC, trauma ICU nurses that are becoming nurse practitioners.
Huh.
So we've already worked with them on cases. So when I walk into a hospital and I see them and I'm speaking with them, we already have their ear. They already know what to do. They already know who to call. So it's worked out well in the few hospitals for me that they've transitioned into.
And that is exactly what we perceive is happening, and what we've been hearing a little bit is that some of the folks that are going into these advanced practitioner roles you already have relationships with, and they're going to be the people that are going to be really crucial to working with as they shift into those roles more and more. So you have some great built-in opportunities with them already. Any other thoughts? Yes?
Alicia with American Transplant. So I do work in a teaching hospital, and we have a lot of residents and fellows, but the nurse practitioners are also very, very present, and the residents and fellows will come and go, but the nurse practitioners stay there longer. So I think they're definitely, in my case, worth building.
And we've made an effort to include residents and fellows a little bit more. We've been asking OPOs to please include them in their lists, and sometimes we'll even see if we can get referrals to get to some of them. One of the really interesting things about residents and fellows is that they'll work with you, and then they'll go and work with another OPO, and they'll tell that other OPO how good or bad you were. So, in fact, Mid-America Transplant, I remember we have gotten feedback at other people that have worked with Mid-America Transplant and then gone to work with another OPO, and they have compared them, usually favorably. But we do hear that sometimes. So it is a very interesting part of the residents and fellow process.
We've had doctors that we've interviewed saying they're pro-donation, but they're not pro the OPO.
Yes.
Can we get a different OPO? I said, that's not my department. So that's a new phenomenon. They're pro-donation, but they don't like the way the OPOs deal with it. I mean, this is not a common thing we hear. I'm just throwing it out, but we did hear this a couple of times.
Any other thoughts or reactions or questions? Yes?
Do you find that there's a difference in rating when you're doing an online survey versus verbal? And you kind of touched on that a little bit. The reason I asked is that we did our employee survey, and it was filled out online by some and then over phone by some.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just thinking there's a difference, because I was one of the ones that had to do it online. I did it online and then it got erased, so I had to do it on phone. And I was like, I have no idea what I put. And at the end of it, I thought, I think I gave a higher rating on the phone.
So there's absolutely a difference in how human beings rate when they're rating on a computer-administered survey versus when they're rating in a human-administered survey. And when you add in the abstraction of the telephone or the actual online browser, it changes things further still. So yes, it is not advisable to mix methodologies if we can avoid it. And that's why with the Tennessee group that we're piloting with, we first tried to complete as much on the phone as we could, So we can say that's our gold standard data, and then we can compare the online data to it. Now, we don't have enough data in this particular study to make a judgment of what the tilt is, what the difference is. It will take some time before we can have that. However, that is a very, very good point. Whenever you mix methodologies for survey data collection, you have to be really mindful of how that's going to change the way things are rated.
The actual data, Sean is right about not mixing them. What you really lose by the online is really, you can't probe them.
Right.
You know, a good interviewer is going to say, why did you say that? How'd that happen? And they're not going to write much. You know, they just blah, 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 you know. I guess I'm a little old school. We've done a lot of online studies, and the data is just not as rich as it is with the phone interview.
Yeah, I wondered, because we had a lot of comments about how it just, I mean, even if it was a 10-minute phone conversation, that it took 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And so wondering how that influences it, and then if we look at our data from last year, and then if we do the survey next year, how to compare those two data sets, because it's not
Right.
the same.
And that's definitely a consideration that we'd have to make as well in comparable data, is if we switch methodologies, then it becomes more of an apple to oranges comparison. So we have to account for that. Absolutely.
We're not so fast to switch methodologies.
But we also are, and David and I have this discussion all the time, we also are mindful of the fact that many of your hospital partners are choosing not to participate in the study if they feel like the telephone takes too long. And so we're trying to find ways around that. And we are very open to any feedback or suggestions that you all have too. We are experts in research, but we are not so into what we do that we're not willing to listen to new ideas, I promise.
It'd be interesting if you did like a one time a year,
Mhm.
or once every 2 years verbal, and then did like the flash surveys you were talking about, maybe throughout the year, maybe once a quarter, to see, I don't know.
That's a good thought. Okay, I'm going to go to Andrew and then back to Larry.
Andrew Nolan's Lifeline of Ohio. How are OPOs utilizing the, I don't know, 250-page addendum with all the comments?
Andrew had a very, very long report because they had 111 hospital staff and how many physicians? Was it 50 or 60 physicians? Andrew had a very long report that he just got to read. And let me ask you guys, is the length of the report something that you find daunting? Because we give you everything that we hear in the study. Is it daunting? Is it valuable? How do you guys use the report, the appendices of the report in your organizations? Any thoughts? Look for themes? I thought you said look for our names. Which some of you have been mentioned positively, yeah. So you look for themes. Yes?
So that's actually my question is,
Mhm.
because you guys asked us when it's presented in final format, do you want individual names that are listed in the comments shared in the final report? So I guess my question is are OPOs or how are OPOs utilizing the comments, good, bad, all of that, to share in sort of just a one-on-one discussion with the team? I think it's valuable
Mhm.
information, especially when you start to see the repeat themes that may come up about certain individuals in your team. Again, good, bad.
We've used it, Kim from last year, all that, but we've used it, we developed PowerPoint presentations for each of our hospitals, so not really team oriented for the OPO, but then we shared specific comments from that hospital on the slides, so, in both positive and negative, just to show our transparency, so that they knew, that we didn't just look at all the good feedback, that we did look at the, constructive feedback as well. And we shared just as much negative feedback that we received as we did positive. And it's been viewed very well by the hospitals when we've done those presentations.
And we generally encourage sharing the reports internally with anyone that's connected to the process, not sharing the reports externally with anybody because A, it's too much information, but B, it's very easy to cherry pick. It's very easy to look for things that are negative and go, see, I told you this is the problem and you guys never listened to me, and we certainly don't want to invite that. Did we get to the, go ahead, David.
Our suggestion usually is to delete anybody's name that's negative because it'll kill them. I mean, to put that out internally. So we definitely, we give it to you straight the way we have it, but we urge you to take it out before it becomes finalized, to take out any negative comments. And we don't see anything wrong with leaving people's names in when it's positive. Some of you don't want to
All right, I saw a couple of other hands. Go ahead, Larry.
Introduction to physicians with catastrophic brain injury guidelines, and basically case reviews, bringing up donor management goals of where the organs were being fused at the beginning of the case all the way to the end, and how do we bring that to their attention without telling them what they should be doing, or
Mhm.
the basic care of a patient using your own catastrophic brain injury guidelines.
Okay,
It's
so.
been a huge challenge, especially with teaching hospitals
Mhm.
and residents and support that we're working on.
Somebody else can answer, we don't have an answer to that.
So that one, I was going to say, I can't answer that, but I would love to hear. So could you say it really succinctly so everyone in the room could hear it?
Catastrophic brain injury guidelines is basic patient care. Someone has a catastrophic brain injury. Well, we have donor management goals to perfuse the organs, which is on the clinical side, that we are now measuring. We're part of a study. And how we bring this to their attention of where the organs are being and how they're being perfused from the beginning. And what did it take, how long we were in their hospital, because we're occupying their bed, the longer period of time that we're trying to keep getting these organs perfused to find a home for them, giving those results to them, and what did we have to do to have a higher yield with transplantation for that donor.
Sorry, you tell Dr. D to do a good job.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
I
it's
think
Yeah.
doctors are so data-driven that just giving them the exact information in a very non-judgmental way.
Yeah, you almost have to put it in like a case presentation, and it'd be very, very objective. And a lot of times in doing that, they'll have an aha moment, because they're like, oh, a sodium was 190, you know, and it's kind of like, oh, well, we missed the boat, and then they'll start to take ownership of it. But I think that's the most effective way to do it, is to put it in a case presentation, because that's how they're used to seeing that kind of data, and having it be incredibly objective.
So we do that as well, but we also compare them to their other hospital partners. Competition is your friend.
Yes.
And they want to perform at the same level,
Yes.
if not better than another hospital. So we will provide them quarterly data of where their hospital is compared to other hospitals, and we provide them with all 4 data points, at the time of referral, at the time of authorization, at the time we allocate, and then prior to the OR. And, you know, we own the allocation and the prior to the OR, but they own the process up until authorization. And they'll say, well, what happened here? Why are we only meeting 4 goals at this point? And what's even more powerful is if we went from referral to authorization and we lost ground, that to them, we've gotten a lot of aha moments with that.
All right, and this is part of the reason that we love to bring you all together, because this is a great group with which to ask these questions and to get a lot of really informed, experienced responses. So I encourage you all, because we're gonna break for the evening here in just a moment. I encourage you all to continue to have these conversations offline. Take a tour of the Organ Recovery Suite and start thinking about some of these issues. Now, to wrap up, first of all, I want to thank you for sitting through this presentation. I know that there's been a lot thrown at you, but we really, really appreciate you being here, and we hope that you got a lot out of what we've had to share already. I would like to just briefly ask, I want to introduce you to our team. Vu, would you mind standing up? Back in the very back, this is Vu Do, and Vu is a research associate with us and also a former student of mine who just does tremendous work. And she has been working on a national qualitative analysis of your data, some of which you're going to hear more about tomorrow. So I wanted to introduce Vu. Michael, would you stand up? This is Michael Saceda, and Michael is working on his PhD at SLU right now. And Michael has been working on the quantitative national analysis, and he's been very involved in trying to understand who are the leaders in all of these different variables. So I wanted to introduce him. And then Marisa. Is your sister with you? Oh, yeah. Marisa and Ellie are graphic artists, and they worked as a team to design some of the things that you've gotten to see here. They really like to add a little bit of polish to what we're doing, so I just want to introduce them, as well as the infographics we've been putting with each report. And then Paula McCreary has stepped out, but Paula, many of you know if you've worked with her on the study, Paula is our fieldwork manager and also our office manager, and Paula is here and is going to be helping with the dessert. And speaking of dessert, so Paula, I challenged her to find a really unique dessert that we could have. A few years ago, we had these really bizarre cupcakes that were they had like beer and bacon in them and things like that. Last year, Core had an amazing spread, or 2 years ago, excuse me, Core had an amazing spread of desserts from Pittsburgh. This year, Paula hired a gentleman named Stan the Donut Man. He was going to drive his truck over and serve donuts. But, and I'm sorry to say this because it's actually very sad, Stan died 2 weeks ago. But, fortunately, we are very sad for Stan. We truly are. He was apparently he did this with his wife as a family business. But Paula found another donut truck called the Dapper Donut, and they should be here, and they will be serving donuts that are freshly cooked. And we encourage you to take some with you, enjoy them. Please, if you would like to take a tour of the Mid-America Transplant Organ Recovery Suite, Bill, are you going to be leading that tour? Bill Murin will be leading that tour. And we encourage you, if you've not seen it, it is a fantastic facility. You need to check it out. Bill is right here. Thank you so much. If you have any questions tonight, let us know. If we can do anything to make your time better, let us know as well. Thank you.